Hey guys, Nick from KN Tech, welcome back. Well, today I'm going to be doing the first in a two-part series on how to build a PC. This video is going to be aimed at some of the newer members of the audience, some people who maybe are not too familiar with building a PC at the moment, and just to give them an idea of how to go about picking the parts and to make sure they're all compatible with each other. And in the second video I'll be showing you about how to put all those parts together and how to get your PC up and running. So here we go guys, follow along and we'll see how it turns out. So the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to decide whether you want to get a new PC or new PC parts, or whether you're going to pick up some second-hand parts. Now obviously with the graphics card shortage that's going on at the moment, picking up new components, including a new graphics card, is probably going to be a bit more difficult. You may have better luck using the second-hand market. Lots of people use places like eBay or Facebook Marketplace to pick up components from people who have already upgraded their PC and they want to sell their old ones on. The second thing you're going to want to do, you're going to want to have a think about what it is you're going to be using the PC for. Now if it's going to be just gaming, that could sway your decision against getting some components against others. If you're going to be using it for doing anything like streaming or video rendering, or maybe even creating some YouTube channels or creating some content, then you may want to go a different route. So let's have a look at the two options we've got available to us. So you're going to want to either go down the AMD route or you're going to want to go down the Intel route. Now traditionally Intel, back in previous generations, used to be a little bit better for gaming because they would tend to have better single core performance. Most games of the time tended to use the single core and not use multi-core, so therefore most people who want to buy and build a gaming machine would usually go down the Intel route. More recently the AMD processors have caught up a lot, and that single core performance is a little bit closer to, and in some cases even matches, Intel for performance. If however you want to do any kind of rendering, YouTubing or streaming, you're probably going to want to go down the AMD route because they tend to usually have more cores and then more threads, which means it's able to do more things simultaneously. So once you've decided which processor you want to use, that's going to sway your decision on which motherboard you're going to want to get. Now obviously depending on whether you're going to be using AMD or whether you're going to be using Intel, depends on whether you're going to be getting an AMD motherboard or whether you're going to be getting an Intel motherboard. It's very important to remember that the Intel motherboards and the AMD motherboards are very much dependent on the CPU you're going to be getting. Now the good thing about the AMD motherboards is the same socket on the motherboard, in this case it's going to be the AM4 socket, actually gives you support for a lot of the AMD processors going backwards, even up to the current ones at the moment. If you're going down the Intel route, they tend to change out the socket of their CPU every 1 or 2 versions. So for example, if you're going to be using an 8th gen or a 9th gen, you're going to want a motherboard that's a socket LGA1151. And if you're going to be going for something that's 10th or 11th gen, you're going to be looking for a motherboard that's socket LGA 1200. It's very important that you make sure you get the right motherboard depending on which processor you're going to be using, otherwise you could end up with a processor that doesn't physically fit in your motherboard. Now talking about motherboards a little more, you'll notice that they tend to come in different specifications for the same generation. So for example, for the AM4 motherboard, which is the one you see I've got on the table right now, they do a B550 or an X570 range. Now let me explain the difference between the two. The B550 is going to be a standard entry-level motherboard for the AM4 processors. This means you're not going to be able to do anything like overclocking. The power delivery systems are going to be of the basic end, and they're not going to allow you to overclock and then get some improved power delivery into your CPU. So the components on the board are adequate, but they are just adequate. If you want to do something like overclocking, whether that be memory overclocking or whether you want to overclock your CPU, you're going to want to go for the X570, which is the one that I've got on the table right here. Similarly, if we look at the Intel motherboards, they have a very similar way of identifying themselves as well. So for example, you can see on the table I've got the Z390. This is the equivalent to the X570, so it's the top end of the performance range. In this case it's for the 8th and 9th gen Intel CPUs, that's the 8000s or the 9000s. They also do a Z370, which is a bit like the B550s in the AMD side of things. So again, it's going to have basic power delivery, it's going to have basic components, but it's going to certainly get the job done, but it's not going to be any good for you if you want to do any kind of overclocking. Okay, so that's our motherboards taken care of. Now let's have a look at our processors. So I have here an Intel i5 8600K, and I also have an AMD Ryzen 9 3900X. Now these are not latest versions, So this is an 8th generation or an 8 series SKU of the Intel line, and this is the 3000 series of the AMD CPUs. So these are not, they've currently just brought out the 5000 series for the AMDs, and they've brought out the 10th generation for the Intel, and I think they're currently working on the 11s if they're not out already. So this starts with an 8. This is an 8600K. The K in this instance denotes that it's overclockable. It's unlocked, and if you can use that with one of the top-end boards, so the Z390s, that means you'll be able to overclock it. Again, with the 3900X, the X denotes the fact that it's overclockable. So if you go with an X570 motherboard, you're going to be able to overclock it. Again, like I said earlier, very important that you make sure you match the CPUs with your motherboards, otherwise you're going to end up with a CPU that doesn't physically fit in the slot. Okay, so that's motherboard and CPU. Now let's take a look at memory. So I have on the table a set of DDR4 memory. This is 64 gigs, so this is 4 times 16 slots. And this is 2400 megahertz, which you can see just here. The 2400 megahertz denotes the speed that the memory runs at. Now, if you're running an AMD CPU, you're going to want to get memory that runs a little faster. Faster memory tends to be preferred by the AMD CPUs, and it allows it to do more things more quickly and be able to multitask a lot better. The DDR4 has come in since the 6th and 7th gen of Intel CPUs, and it's been around on the AMD systems since I think the early Ryzen, the first Ryzens. Memory is really important. You don't have to have a huge amount of memory. 16 gig is probably what you're going to want to need if you're doing any kind of gaming or if you're doing any streaming. If you want to future-proof yourself, by all means increase that, go up to 32 gigs. That way you've got a little bit of headroom to grow going forward. Like I said, you can find memory on marketplaces, on eBay. You'll have all sorts of different online marketplaces that you can find based on your location wherever you are in the country or in the world. Okay, so another thing you're going to need is you're going to need a power supply. You're going to need something to power all the equipment that you're going to put in your case. Now I have on the desk here right now 2 different types of power supply which you can buy at the moment. I have here on the left the EVGA Supernova 1000 G3. This is a standard ATX power supply, and I have on the right next to it the Be Quiet SFXL, and this is actually an SFX power supply, which means it's smaller. SF stands for small form factor. Now depending on what you're going to build in terms of PC, in terms of what the case is going to be like, will dictate whether you want to go for a standard size power supply or whether you want to go for a smaller size power supply. For example, if you're going to be using a small form factor case because you want to build a media PC that's going to sit in your entertainment center, maybe underneath your TV or something like that, and you're going to use it primarily for streaming videos and that kind of thing. If it's a small form factor using a small case, you're probably going to want to use an SFX power supply. I have them both here so I can give you an indication as to the size differences between the two. So this is a standard ATX power supply. In actual fact, let me clear these boxes out of the way so you can get a better idea as to what the sizing of them is. So this is a standard ATX power supply, and you can see if I put my hand on it, for example, you can see it's about the size of a reasonably sized man's hand. This gives you an idea as to kind of how big it is. I know there's nothing for you to have reference to, but it kind of gives you an idea. And if I bring in the SFX power supply and put it next to it, you can see it's a whole bunch smaller. It's at least a third shorter. It's nowhere near as wide either, and it's also nowhere near as deep. So for example, if you were going to build a micro ATX build, we're using a micro ATX motherboard, which is the smallest size you can get, this power supply is actually going to be bigger than the motherboard itself. So like I said, if you've got a small form factor, you're going to want to use something that's really small like this. They tend to also come with an adapter plate, which means that when you attach them to the case, even if there's no dedicated spaces for a small form factor, you do get an adapter plate so you can actually fit it in a standard PC case that has the standard mounts for a standard size power supply. Okay, let's talk about something a little more controversial at the moment, and that's graphics cards, GPUs. Now, as you're all probably aware, if you're not, you may have been living under a rock for the last 9 months. Graphics cards are extremely in short demand at the moment. Now, this is due to a number of reasons, and everybody's got their own understanding as to why they think that reason might be. Initially, the first reason is because the new 3000 series of GeForce RTX cards came out right around the time that the pandemic kicked in and people were starting to spend more time at home. This then made PC users at home want to upgrade because they needed their PCs for doing things like Zoom calls, video calls, that kind of thing. So they went out and they started buying them a lot more. There's also the rise in crypto mining, so Bitcoin mining, Ethereum, that kind of thing, because these cards are really good at mining cryptocurrencies. So of course all the cryptocurrency miners are going out and they're buying them in bulk as well. So basically, it basically means that you pretty much can't buy a new GPU anymore. Now, like I said, marketplaces, the second-hand marketplace is where you're going to find some. Yes, there are going to be people on there that have got their hands on new GPUs, and they're going to scout the prices on them, and they're going to try and sell them on at vastly inflated prices. It's entirely up to you. If you decide you've got the money and you want to buy it, that's entirely up to you. I, however, wouldn't recommend it, because the more people that buy them, the more they're just going to keep inflating the prices, and they're going to keep selling it on. Now, like I said, you can find items on a second-hand marketplace. So, for example, I have here in front of me a perfectly acceptable GTX 970. Now, this is one down from the 980, which at the time was the top of the range if you discount the TIs and all that kind of stuff. So this was one down from the flagship of the 9000 series. Now, obviously, this is a couple of generations old. We've had the 1080s, we've had the 10 series, the 20 series, and now the 30 series. So it's a few generations old. However, it will play your games. You know, even if you're using a AAA title game, it's still going to be able to play it at reasonable settings, medium, I would say, possibly even high, depending on which game you're going to be playing. And like I said, you can pick these up on marketplaces, second-hand marketplaces, either Facebook Marketplace or eBay or something like that, and you can pick these up. Don't forget, you don't actually have to have a GPU in your computer. There are CPUs that you can get where they have integrated graphics built into them. So for example, some of the AMD chips have Radeon graphics built into them, and some of the Intel graphics cards, they also have Intel graphics built into them. So, and you can play most games on low settings with one of those. So it could be a case that you go now and you pick up something like an all-in-one CPU or an APU as they're called sometimes, and you can use that to start building your PC. You can use it to start doing some gaming, and then at a later date, when everything becomes normal again with the graphics cards, and whoever knows when that's going to be, you can then pick up a graphics card and you can add it in to give your machine an improvement in the graphics performance. So there's one more thing we've left to do, and this is hard drive. You're going to need somewhere to store everything on. Now, I've left this to last because this is probably the category that's got the most diversity around that you can buy. All of it will work. Some will work better than others. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through real quick the options that you've got available for using for your storage inside your PC. The first and the oldest and probably the most basic is a standard hard drive. Now, this consists of a spinning platter inside here that spins at, and there's two specifications here. It's either 5400 RPM or 7200 RPM. The former being slightly slower than the latter. So if you've got a 5400 RPM hard drive, it's not going to perform as well as a 7200 RPM hard drive. So this is the basic kind of storage that you can get. You can get them in all kinds of sizes from 120 gigs all the way up to like 4 terabytes. What a lot of people do is use this for their bulk storage, but you can certainly run it. You can certainly run your PC on a hard drive. It's not going to be the quickest PC in the world, but it will get you going. And again, like graphics cards, it's something that you can upgrade down the line. Stepping up from that, we have an SSD. Now that stands for solid state drive, and that basically means there are no moving parts inside. There are no spinning disks. It's just a collection of memory chips or chiplets put together on a PCB with a controller, which allows faster access to the memory. It's more comparable to RAM memory than it is comparable to a hard drive. You can think of it as RAM, just a lot more of it, and it's longer term as well. It will keep things in storage after you turn it off. The advantages of using an SSD, it's much quicker, like considerably quicker. If any of you have used a PC that's got an old spinning disk in it, whether it be a 5400 or a 7200, and you've moved over to an SSD, you'll know that the performance increase is quite vast. You know, we're talking game loading times, system boot times, anything where you need to transfer files, copy files to and from, goes a lot quicker on an SSD. So more recently and more common recently is M.2 drives. So this is an M.2 drive I have here. This is one. Let me grab it out of the box and I'll show you what it looks like. So M.2 drives actually fit directly on the motherboard of your PC, which means they don't have to. Which means there's a lot less interface going between it and your computer as such. And you can see they're really small. So there's two types of M.2 drive. There's a standard SSD M.2 drive, or there's what's called an NVMe, non-volatile memory SSD M.2 drive. Sorry. You can tell the difference quite quickly by looking at it. So the M.2 will have a single notch here. So it'll be consisted of one large part of PCB and then a smaller part near the end with a single notch, which you can see right there. A non-NVMe, so that's not the non-volatile memory, will have two notches. So it'll have a notch at the other end, just around about here. Now, these are SSDs. So the non-NVMEs are just like having one of these, but it effectively plugs straight into your motherboard. It's going to be a little quicker. It's going to be a little bit quicker than this, which is in turn a lot quicker than this. The NVMe drives are going to be even quicker than the non-NVMe M.2 drives. So these actually are a lot quicker even still. So you're talking the speed comparison between that and this is truly staggering. It is absolutely very noticeable. And again, like I said, these fit directly on your motherboard, so you've got less interface problems to go wrong, you've got less cables to fail, you've got less points of failure. They do get warm. Some of them will need heat sinks, some of them will come with heat sinks. Some motherboards will have lift-off heat sinks that you can actually put on top of these once you install them. Go for whatever you can afford. Go for the fastest you can afford. If you're starting out and you're on a real tight budget, maybe get yourself like a small SSD, so like maybe like a 120 gigabytes, so like really like quite small. Use that and put your operating system on that. That way you're going to have the speed and the responsiveness of the operating system coming from an SSD, but you're not having to pay a huge amount for high-speed storage for things like your game files and that kind of thing. You can always tie it up with a spinning disk, so you have two in there. In that case, you'll have your operating system on your SSD, and then you'll have your storage for all your games and that and whatnot on your spinning disk. Try and go for the 7200. It is a little bit quicker. All of these devices have a finite lifespan. When I say a finite lifespan, I'm talking it's a long time. So the likelihood is, if you keep it for 8-10 years, at some point something is going to fail. I mean, I've had a couple fail on me. I've been doing this for fun. I've been doing this as a hobby for a long time now. I've had 2 hard drives fail on me in total, but I do use quite a lot of hard drives. So, but just bear in mind these are consumable parts and they will eventually expire. There's one more thing we're going to need, and I forgot to mention it earlier, and that's we're going to need a copy of an operating system. Windows 10 is the most common operating system at the moment, and if you want to do any kind of gaming, you're going to need a Windows 10, because basically all of the games in the world ever are basically made to go on Windows 10. I'm exaggerating. You can game on Linux, Unix, Linux platforms, that kind of thing. Most common is Windows 10. You don't have to buy a copy like this from a store. You can go online, you can download a copy, and what will happen is it'll download it and it will install it onto either a CD-ROM. If you're going to use a CD-ROM, most people don't tend to use CD-ROMs. It's probably going to download it and install it onto a USB drive, a thumb drive, and you'll use that to install it. Don't forget to pick up your license while you're on the download page, I don't condone people using unlicensed software, but it's entirely up to you if you choose to or not. I do not. Well, that about wraps it up for going through the parts of a new PC build, the parts you can get, the parts you can't get, what is compatible with what. Like I said, if you're not sure if something is compatible with something else, so for example, if you're buying a CPU and you're not sure whether it's got integrated graphics, go online, put in the CPU number, put in the CPU you're buying into Google, and then look for the specifications, and then you'll be looking for integrated graphics, yes or no. As for anything else, if you're not sure about the compatibility, Google is your friend. Go into Google, ask it, is this compatible with this? Can I use this with this? And it'll usually come up in the first couple of results with the answer to your question. So like I said, that wraps it up for this one, guys. In the next video, I'll be taking you through the process of how you get all those components and you put them in a case and you fire it up and you can get working. So thanks for watching, guys. I really hope you liked it. Come back and join me for the second one. Don't forget to hit the like button if you liked the video. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button if you're not already subscribed. Don't forget to hit the bell notification so you'll be notified when I put my next video up. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you on the next one.